Hello, Dark Reader, and welcome to the Dark Side of the Library podcast. I'm your host, Katie. Today we're going to be talking about The Quiet Tenant. This is a debut novel by Clémence Michallon. I hope I said that right. French is not my forte. So, I had to put this on my TBR. I had to escalate it on my TBR because when I read about it in June for our curated books, which wasn't that long ago, it sounded very good. I love serial killer thriller stuff. I used to be an electrician. I used to listen to Sword and Scale before our host went meh, and then but I would listen to it in the dark, roping houses by myself in the middle of wherever. These stories are fascinating to me, so this was very much up my alley. Let me give you a summary of what this book is about. We have a character whose name is Aiden Thomas. He's a hardworking family man. He's a beloved figure in the town. People love him. He's like the guy who's like walking the old ladies across the street. He saved a dog once. He donated however much money to the charity cause for this little girl or something. Like, he's just that guy, as far as the town is concerned. He does these great Christmas parties. He's just very welcoming. He's handsome. He's charming. But spoilers. And by the way, this book does go through some very dark themes, sexual assault, violence against women, murder, etc., etc. So please be aware. We're going to continue on and kind of talk about these things. So our main character, Aiden, not only is he this great guy doing all these great things, he's also horrible. He kidnaps women, he kills them, he rapes them, he keeps them. So he's just horrible. He has this very deep, dark secret. And even further to that, he's kept his girl in the shed, who's also named Rachel, a little further on in the story. She's been living in his shed for about 5 years, kidnapped, and every day dealing with this stuff. Aiden's wife ends up passing away, and so he takes his 13-year-old daughter and him, Cecilia, to move somewhere else. He believes that he has no other choice but to bring his hostage, Rachel, with them. But this is what he does. He introduces Rachel as a family friend who needs a place to stay. So Aiden is betting that Rachel is too brainwashed, too committed, is too invested in her Stockholm Syndrome, essentially, to do anything, and he just takes her to this new place without the fear that she would go and try to escape. As Rachel dines with them every night, he starts to begin to have this really interesting relationship with Aiden's daughter, Cecilia. It's a little tenuous and strange, and at the same time, a bartender in the local town that they live in is starting to develop feelings for Aiden, and Aiden the same. And then, even further, the bartender, Emily, she starts to get involved in this orbit between the other two girls with Cecilia and Rachel. This is supposed to be a psychological thriller, and it is exploring what Aiden's tendencies and how Aiden has impacted the lives of each individual woman and what those bonds between those three become and how they utilize that to fight back. That is what the publisher notes are. So let me just tell you who Clémence Michallon is. She's Parisian. She studied political sciences in Paris. She is a journalist. She's worked at The Independent in New York. And she's written, I think, 2 books. But this is her true debut novel, The Quiet Tenant. She did write another novel in French. It's called The Last Time I Thought I Was Dead, a long time ago. It's about a bodybuilder, and it's interesting. It's kind of, I don't know if it's bordering on a bit of body horror, but it talks about art of seduction, puberty, diets, etc. like that. So, but this one is definitely, The Quiet Tenant is a different kind of novel altogether, but it does explore, I guess, some things that women have to deal with. So let me just talk to you about my rating real fast. So originally I gave this about a 2.5. It was entertaining. I finished the whole thing. I had no problem. There was points where I was like, I want to know what happens next. So it was like not exhilarating, but I was just very curious about it. But the more I'm sitting on it, the more frustrated I get. So it's like watching those TV shows where you're just like, why are you making these choices? That's how I felt throughout this novel, and that's kind of what stimulated me to keep going the whole time. I don't know how you would define that feeling, but that's what it was for me. So this was a 2.5, but it's slowly starting to become more like a 2. First of all, I have to say, Aiden has some big balls. He decides to take his kidnapped victim out in broad daylight, grab her, move her, integrate her into their actual living household, have her allowed to be out and have dinner with them, and expect that she's not gonna leave? I mean, ugh. Okay, so for a while, I was convinced. So throughout the story, Aiden does a few things to basically reassure our woman in the shed / Rachel that don't do anything because I have X, Y, and Z all laid out. So we already have, like, Clémence is already thinking about that kind of thing and how ludicrous that is. So I was like, fine. All right, she's explaining why he's getting away with it, why he even feels like he can, and also why Rachel doesn't necessarily take the leap. Okay, fine. I'll let it pass, but it went too far. And there was too many times where I was like, no possible way would I not leave. Stockholm Syndrome or not, if I had evidence, hard evidence, if I had actual weapons, accessibility to weapons, if I had the availability to leave and I knew nobody was watching and I desperately wanted to, because that's the inner monologue going on in Rachel's head, I would. And it never happened. Okay, so let's talk about further the book. So Aiden, biggest balls in the entire world. The antagonist, Aiden, in a lot of ways is very unbelievable. I've watched a lot of documentaries. I've listened to a lot of things. I've done a lot of my own studying from, like just people, criminals like this. Not to say there aren't really cocky, very arrogant, handsome, unbelievable. Ted Bundy obviously is the one that everybody goes to, but there's a ton out there. I mean, even Big Ed, who's super smart. People, this is why serial killers and stuff are, sometimes it's so crazy where it's like, how is this person going through all of this stuff and able to be so evil? It's, like those things do happen, but our main protagonist in this, Aiden, wow, he'd have to be pretty brilliant to pull off a lot of this stuff. He's been able to get away with 9 crimes. 8 women have been murdered. So he has to be fairly well established, pretty good at what he does. Anyway, so the story is broken up into 3 perspectives. We are narrated by each female. So Cecilia, the daughter. We have Emily, the bartender, who met Aiden when she was 14 years old as a young one. And anyway, I'll go on about Emily later. And then lastly, of course, we have the woman in the shed, or Rachel. So we alternate different perspectives. It's the same, mostly chronological timeline. Sometimes it's like side by side. So we have like a Rachel thing happening, and then Cecilia, we have that happening in another place. I like how Clémence has done that, how she's interwoven these different narratives together to make a very interesting dynamic story in that way, with different people, different ages, different rationale. So let's talk about, since we are broken down into each character in their narration, let me do that in how I felt with the story. Cecilia is the daughter, and honestly, I feel like she wasn't very prevalent. She didn't really have a purpose in the story. The problem I'm having with this is, like, not every character needs to have, like, this very significant purpose, but the whole point is that we have 3 women who are all like, their entire orbit is surrounding Aiden, and how they've all started to gravitate with each other and how that affects each other overall, and that includes Cecilia. Unfortunately, everything just drops off for her, even towards the end. Cecilia idolizes her dad, but she knows that he's not perfect at the same time. She doesn't have any freedom to go anywhere. She has no friends. All she does is she stays at home. She'll read. She'll sleep. If she does leave, she's with her dad, or she'll watch TV. So she doesn't really, there's not a lot of depth to Cecilia. The only thing she has is kind of giving us a context for Aiden and his relationship with their now deceased mother. So Cecilia, though, just doesn't have a whole lot of impact with the story. She's not necessarily important, but it's so weird because Rachel, the female in the shed, she puts so much emphasis on Cecilia. So I guess maybe that's what it is. I didn't feel drawn to Cecilia in any way. And I didn't really feel like, aside from the fact that her mother just passed away, I didn't really feel like Cecilia would have that much power over me if I was in the same situation. It felt unbelievable and it wasn't enough. She didn't even have that much character either. So next I'm going to talk about Emily. She, I think, is the Achilles heel in this whole story. She made this story, it was cringe, very cringe. Emily meets Aiden when she's 14 years old. Her father was a restaurant owner, and he just, like, loved work. Pretty typical dad trope. He passes away, and so Emily inherits the restaurant, and she becomes that hardworking restaurant owner. And her mom is also passed away. She's young, probably in her 20s, I would imagine. She's around the same age as the woman in the shed. Emily, for some reason, develops feelings for Aiden way back, it seems like, in the past. And to the point where now she's, like, as an adult, is longing for him, even months after his wife passes away, during very vital times like holidays, and she's just, yeah. So the relationship doesn't make any sense, or it's basically like Emily needs some serious therapy because she has some big daddy issues, and unfortunately, and yeah, this is going to be gross, Aiden is replacing daddy. He's dad for her. Ugh. Anyway, another thing about Emily is she is not like a regular person. She is the snoopiest person in the entire world. I know some snoopy people. In fact, we used to make fun of my stepfather for being Mrs. Kravitz. He was Snoopy. But even Mrs. Kravitz has nothing on Emily. Emily will make an excuse to go into people's houses, explore their spaces, and, like, to the point it's trespassing, and it's very, like, it would make me very uncomfortable. She is just a really desperate character, and it's just sad, and I just don't like that she's I don't know, the protagonist part, it doesn't fit, and it's unbelievable as well. It makes no sense to me. So Emily is really, truly one of the more, and Aiden is every waking moment to her. She breathes and thinks Aiden. Aiden is her whole world, and it's so odd. I mean, it's obsession. It's not love. It's stalkery. It's creepy. It's actually creepy. And then finally, our next character with her perspective, Rachel, the girl in the shed. So I don't care how much Stockholm Syndrome you have, especially with the monologue we get inside of Rachel, the stuff that she says to herself. She wants to leave. She talks about it a lot. She wants to wait for the right moment. She rationalizes things for a while fairly well. But eventually it gets stupid, where you're just like, what are you doing? She has a very long leash, and she has many opportunities to make her escape reasonably, and she doesn't. She doesn't at all. And it's sometimes to the point where it is so ludicrous that it's unrealistic. I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler here. So if you want to read The Quiet Tenant, please go for it. I gave it about a 2.5. Let me know what you think. But here's an example of one of the Rachel moments where I was like, what on earth was the thought process here? Aiden takes Rachel out, literally, out to the world. And Aiden, they're driving in his truck. Aiden goes and meets up with the judge in the town, in this small town. And the judge doesn't recognize her, and he's like, oh, who's this? And Aiden eventually speaks up for her and is like, oh yeah, this is kind of like my friend, cousin, person thing, whatever. And then the judge is like, oh, cool, awesome, nice to meet you. I would immediately be like, save me. What is he gonna do? What is he gonna do? Like, drive off? Laugh? Oh, she's got some disease or something. Or like, what, there's just, so that was one example. Maybe it's a weak example, but there's a couple things with Rachel where she's had ample opportunity to leave and she just doesn't. And it makes no sense. Even with Stockholm Syndrome, even with fearing for your life, it makes no sense. And the rationale did not work. I think probably the biggest disappointment on this book, and I kind of touched on this in the beginning with Aiden being very cocky. We get the view of the women, but we don't actually see what the motive was for Aiden to be this way. Is he just this way? Was he born with it? Did it develop over time? Was he having marital problems? I really wished we had a reason for why he did those things. And the way the story wrapped up at the very end was so quick and rushed. And it felt like, it's all good. I was like, no, it's not. Because you don't even get to see the after effects for all of the girls, really. You don't get to see like what the emotional effects of being missing and kidnapped, like your family being away from your family for that long, or knowing that you were in love with basically a serial killer for years, or your dad was a serial killer. We don't get a lot of that. We don't get a lot of, because there should be signs. The daughter should have seen certain things. It just didn't, it felt very disjointed, and it didn't come together as well as I wanted it to, especially considering we have, unfortunately, a lot of source material that could have been pulled from, a little more research done on the actual effects of family members who do deal with all three of those kinds of situations, like all three of those ladies' perspectives. And also, it's just really interesting because Aiden has a daughter. What are those effects? How is her development and her getting older, how that changes things and how he views things. I just really wish there was a little more there, and I think it would have been more terrifying. It just felt more like a drama to me versus a psychological thriller. The book is a slow burn. There were parts where I was like, okay, go, but it didn't ever happen, and maybe that's where that thrill part came in, but it was never satisfying, I guess. And then the end was just so frustrating for me. So I give this book about a 2.5, probably 2 out of 5. I'm a little disappointed. Let me know what you think of The Quiet Tenant by Clémence Michallon, because I am just very curious. It's a brand new novel. The cover's pretty cool. The premise is interesting. I just wanted a very smart antagonist, because that's the only way he could have managed to do all the things that he did in broad daylight like that. And I wanted more psychological behind a lot of the characters, motive, just a lot of things here. And I just didn't feel like it was empowering either, on like a female perspective, like how those things and how we can bond together. It just I didn't feel like there was any bonding moment. It was like, oops, we ran into each other. You're an inconvenience to me and my time with this man. That's what it felt like. There was no bonding. So I'm confused. Anyway, check out The Quiet Tenant. Let me know what you think. If you are looking for some more dark reads, make sure to join us every Wednesday for our curated books that we do. We do nonfiction, adult fiction, graphic novels, kids books, YA. All dark, spooky, scary, gothic. And you can join me on Fridays for our minisodes, where I do deep dives of the books I've been reading lately. Let your loved ones know about Dark Side of the Library. And make sure to follow us on your favorite listening app or here on YouTube. Thank you so much for listening. If you have been listening all this time, we really appreciate you. You guys are awesome. And have a creep-tastic rest of your week.